This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. Today, we're taking you to the middle seat. No, we're not banishing you to that dreaded spot on the plane with those scrunched elbows that can make you feel like a sardine. Instead, we're talking with the journalist who writes the middle seat column for the Wall Street Journal, covering aviation, transportation, and the woes that travelers too often face. Scott McCartney is joining us from the Wall Street Journal's global headquarters in New York City. Scott, welcome.
Great to be with you, Mark.
So can we just please get this out of the way right off the bat, because I'm sure our listeners are curious about it, just as I am. Where did the name the middle seat come from? I mean, do you just enjoy torturing yourself on flights by sitting there?
No, it's funny. When we created the column back in 2002, I put together a list of a whole bunch of names of things, and then at the end said, if we really wanted to have fun with it, we'd call it the middle seat. And my editor said, that's it. That's perfect. And I've always kind of liked it because, for two sort of journalistic reasons. It is the place that everybody wants to avoid, right? It is. And a lot of what I do is try and explain to people why bad things happen to good travelers. And that includes ending up in the middle seat. And the other thing is I have always tried to be fair and accurate. I've covered this beat a long time. I have, maintained good relations with airlines when I slam the stupid things they do and everything else. And to do that, you have to be accurate and you have to be fair. And there is something sort of egalitarian about the middle seat.
Yeah, you're with us in economy, though. You're there with us in spirit and on the side of the common man. So, Scott, you write a lot of different topics. You cover a lot of different topics in your column there. What is your favorite part of the beat to write about?
My favorite part is really airline operations. It is a immensely complicated business. The more you know, the more you realize what you don't know. I think it's a giant puzzle that continually fascinates, and it is the thing that most affects people's travels. Operations can delay you and you miss the meeting or the wedding or the cruise or whatever. You lose your baggage. All the things that you think about that aggravate and infuriate travelers really get back to how well airlines actually operate. So the time that I get to spend in an airline operations center, which over the years has been fairly frequent, that's the time I most enjoy. And even for my own personal, my wife and I got stuck in Madrid once with an airline that had an engine problem, and then they clearly lied to us and said, "Oh, everybody will be booked on the flight the next day." Well, the problem with that is there's a whole plane load of other people booked on the flight next day, and I knew that they weren't going to fly an empty flight. They had canceled the flight into Madrid, so they had two plane loads of people and one plane. And it became sort of a travel nightmare. And I was yelling at different airline people in Madrid, and my wife said, "Just shut up and write about it." And I did, and it became a really interesting column about how airlines think two wrongs actually make a right.
I think a lot of people can sympathize with you there. And I don't know if you saw it. We just did a podcast last week with Russ Levin. He's the director of the new PBS series, City in the Sky. They did 3 episodes on airline operations. And I'll tell you, it was fascinating, just like you're describing, taking us into the airline operations. And they went into Atlanta in an air traffic control center. And it's just amazing to think about everything that has to go right to fly 1 million people around the world every single day. It is really incredible.
Yeah, it is. You sort of think about quality control, and what would be the quality of your car if General Motors had to build it outside in a rainstorm or whatever. I once, it was a long time ago, I was talking to the head of operations at American Airlines, sort of legendary guy named Bob Baker, and he was very proud because Toyota was coming to look at their maintenance operation. And I said, no disrespect, Bob, but what's Toyota going to learn from you
Hmm.
about manufacturing? And he just sort of, in his crusty way, said, we have to take them apart and put them together. They just put them together.
That is just great. That is so fantastic. Let me ask you this: how do you pick the stories to cover? And in reading your column for a long time now, you've written about everything from high-risk travel training to a wine bar that doubles now as a travel agency in Austin, Texas. So, how do you pick what you want to cover?
Well, the ideas are, that's the thing that keeps me up at night. That's coming up
Mm.
with 50 new ideas every year on this industry. It is the business that sort of keeps on giving for a reporter because things are always changing, things are always new. I have a really consumer focused orientation on this. I try and think like a traveler. What would I want to read as a traveler? What are the big issues? And I'll be working on a bunch of different ideas all at the same time. And the ones that rise to the surface are obviously the ones that are more important, more timely from a news cycle aspect, but also things that I think that people don't know that would be surprising to experienced road warriors. Those are the stories that bubble up faster than the others. But it's really just sort of keeping your eyes open and trying to look for anything that I can look at and say, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Let's look at that more deeply.
So that you learn something new every day, even for those steeped in travel, like frequent flyers. Has your editor ever said, you know what, hey, I think you're off the mark here. I don't really think this column is going to appeal to anybody. Have you ever submitted an idea and the editor just said, Scott, you're crazy?
Yeah, we go through a process, and I give them a list of ideas, and they say, this one doesn't really do it for us, or that kind of thing. It's fairly rare. It's more fun when you have a story that that my readers are just going to gobble up. I did a story recently on boarding procedures and the mess that is boarding procedures, and really the problem of why can't airlines solve this riddle that ought to be fairly straightforward. And my editor just all along kept saying, "Oh, they're going to eat this up. Oh, they're going to eat this up." And the day that it posted, it was the most read story on the Wall Street Journal website.
Oh my gosh! And I'm gonna paraphrase this probably badly, but you started off the article somehow saying that I think it was American or one of the airlines was trying to simplify boarding by creating 9 different boarding groups, and then you said, well,
Yeah.
actually it's 10 if you don't count the one they don't count.
Right. No, that was the absurdity of it. They actually already had 9 boarding groups. They wouldn't admit that. They gave them, very obscure names. And that was the confusion. So you had in their old system, you had people who were in group 1 and would line up early because they logically look at their boarding pass and say, I'm in group 1. And there were 4 groups that boarded before them.
Mm.
And so, then they said, okay, well, we'll number them all. And the problem was, group 10 really sounds grim. And I think group 8 or 9 sounds plenty grim. And there's just all kinds of problems with it. You sell people early boarding. Now that's group 4 or group 5. That's not a great marketing thing. Hey, pay us extra and get group 5. So they've had to change the wording on that. It really becomes sort of and airlines have made boarding into this really complicated, really stressful situation largely because of baggage fees. So overhead bin space is what people are most worried about and why they want to board early.
Well, and I think it's wording exactly like you just described that makes some flyers feel as though they're being misled when they go on and try to buy a ticket or pay a fee or something like that. So, listeners, if you have not read Scott's columns, I want to clue you in on a little thing, and everybody probably approaches reading your columns differently, Scott, but I have to tell you, when I read your columns, I sort of imagine you there typing them out smiling as you're crafting your copy. For example, one of your articles on the TSA's use of social media to respond to complaints and problems, it began this way, quote, "Who knew a government agency could sound so human?" In another article Scott wrote about hotel thermostats, he said, quote, "Unknowing guests around the world are left to push thermostats up and down in vain. Fixing the problem requires a degree or 6 or 7, as well as a bit of a mischievous streak." I like that you're often, can I say, winking at us in your writing?
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate that very much. I try and make it conversational. I try and I have a more freedom in the column format, and I think that really helps sort of the relationship between me as columnist and the reader. And it's this is really aimed for the traveler, and so I want it to be a dialogue back and forth with the traveler. It's not a straight news story. It's not I'm read throughout the industry, but I'm not writing for industry airline executives or things like that. Often for airline employees, I mean, they certainly get a lot out of it, but that too can be conversational. It's for the people on the airplanes.
So let's talk about that. Some people may not appreciate your particular style, and I'm thinking of executives here at some of these airlines. What has been the most pushback you've ever received on a column? I mean, do you field calls from these airlines and these companies saying, "Scott, what have you written?"
Yeah, sure, all the time. I've been screamed at by a whole lot of airline CEOs, and
you've survived it.
And I've survived it, yeah. And I've maintained dialogue with most all of them. It's interesting. There was a particularly interesting episode with Delta when Richard Anderson was CEO. Not of the screaming and yelling variety, but I had noticed that their cancellation rates were unbelievably low. And, the discussion we were having before about airline operations, they were doing some things that no airline had ever done before. And so I went to them and I said, I want to come in. I want to spend some time. I knew the operations center guys. I want to come back and talk to them and talk about what you've done. And this went to Richard Anderson, and he was like, "Why would we talk to you? Because we don't want our competitors to know what we're doing." Well, that's a little naive. Most times the competitors know exactly what you're doing long before we ever do. But it was a real lobbying effort by myself and a couple of people inside Delta to get him to agree to do it. And then I sat down and had dinner with him when he came to do the story. And, we had a very frank discussion about, what they want to preserve and what they want to tell their customers. And it turned out, this was a good thing for them to tell their customers as well.
And listeners, this is one of those things that journalists have to do. Not only are you pitching your editor, but you've got to pitch the sources on a story that you want to interview as well. I mean, it's really a skill, I think, for a lot of journalists to be able to successfully navigate the whole pitching process. And Scott, you pick up on the Delta thing, so let's just talk about that real briefly. I mean, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, you know better than I would, but I think up until last August when they had that big computer meltdown, they had something crazy, like a streak of 150 or 200 days without a cancellation. And I mean, they were really operating on all cylinders.
Yeah, and they operate in some really challenging environments. I mean, we're talking about, a major hub in New York or winter operations in Minneapolis and Detroit, and the largest airport in the world in Atlanta. And that's what's so extraordinary about it. And this, they've been doing this for several years. The operations folks at American, who I have a lot of respect for, but I was with the operations head a couple of weeks ago, and he said, we had 4 days in a row of zero cancellation.
Oh my!
It's kind of like, well, yeah, but Delta had 100. I
Yeah.
mean, it's that's great, and he knew that, and he knew that was an improvement for them, but they know they got long ways to go. This really has been a dramatic change in the business, in the operation, and Delta's operational excellence has really pressured American and United and others to step up their game, which they weren't doing before. And it's customers have noticed. It is a different proposition when the when air travel is more reliable. So I think it's a significant change for the industry. The others really are making improvements, but they still have a long way to go before they catch Delta. And it's extraordinary what they're doing.
Listeners, did you hear that phone ringing in the background? That's another airline CEO calling right now to give Scott a piece of their mind. One of the areas that the other airlines are not following Delta yet, correct me if I'm wrong, but is with this oil refinery that Delta had bought. I think they thought they would be really clever and be able to, make their own jet fuel or something, but no one has yet followed, have they?
No, they haven't, and I don't think they will. Delta's had some quarters where they've had some losses there. It's a really different business. They did it as both as a hedging, angle, and also they were really concerned about the margins that refineries were taking, and they thought, well, if we get in the refinery business, we can exert some pressure there, and make other people bring down their margins. This was, it's a supply of oil of jet fuel for them, but it's not like there aren't other suppliers and other ways to get it. It'll be interesting to see how long they keep the refinery. The other aspect of it was for them, oil basically goes in the opposite direction of airlines. As a Wall Street trade, you can hedge one or the other just by buying. If you're concerned about falling oil prices, for example, you'd buy airlines because airlines benefit when oil prices fall. If you're concerned about rising oil prices, you would buy oil companies because they will benefit when oil prices fall. And so this was seen by Delta as, well, if the airline's not making money, the oil refinery will be making money. And that was sort of a financial hedge that I think now they probably think they don't necessarily need.
Interesting. Some of our listeners may know that one of your most anticipated, maybe the most anticipated column from the Middle Seat each year is this annual ranking of airlines. It's a scorecard of U.S. airline performance, and your rankings cover 8 categories: overall rank, on-time arrivals, canceled flights, extreme delays, 2-hour tarmac delays, mishandled baggage, which of course we all hate, involuntary bumping when you're bumped off the flight without your choice, and complaints. Your 2016 year-end rankings put Alaska Airlines on top overall, followed by Delta. Virgin America was next, and then Southwest, a tie between JetBlue and United, followed by Frontier, Spirit, and at the very bottom, the legacy carrier we were just talking about, American Airlines.
Yeah.
What kind of pressure goes into making this ranking every year?
The pressure's on me to come up with the data, and that sometimes is more challenging than others. I don't get pressure from airlines. Interestingly, I've gotten more queries of what exactly goes into it and all that. Alaska Airlines has actually used this as a motivating thing with their employees, their managers at an annual conference. They did very well. This was actually the previous year. Did well in it, but they were 8th in baggage handling. And so they took the survey and they put it up on the screens in front of all their managers. And they said, this is what we got to fix. And I was actually at an American Airlines leadership meeting earlier this year, and same thing where they called out the survey and they said, look, we're last in this, and we got to do better. So it has become, interestingly enough, there are very few analytical rankings in the airline business. There are a lot of rankings. There is a survey of who's the best this and who's the best that, and who has the best wine collection in first class, and who has, and to me, those are all fairly meaningless. So I tried to put together something that was basically irrefutable, hard numbers on things that matter to travelers. Which airline has the longest 2-hour tarmac delays? Well, that tells you a lot about how that airline operates. But that, for some travelers, that may be the thing that drives you most crazy. So we put together this collection of 8 different parameters, figured out where we could get the best data from. And towards the end of the year, I get in touch with everybody and say, we're doing it again. And, everybody gets the data together, and I do a lot of number crunching with the government data that's available. And we try and do it in early January, just as a very immediate sort of results of the previous year.
Scott, you call yourself a columnist, but this sounds like accountability journalism to me.
Yeah. No, I think it's made a difference. I think it more than the DOT rankings and other things, because it is much broader than that. It has sort of given travelers a voice in rankings. We do a similar thing, working with a consultant who does a lot of really good data on frequent flyer award availability. And this has been another one where I thought this is a huge frustration for travelers. What can we do to kind of shed some light on it? And what can we do to pressure airlines that are being really stingy with their frequent flyer award availability? And so they do a tremendous amount of queries of 25 frequent flyer programs from around the world. And we said, okay, what's important to people is getting that standard award, the 25,000 mile domestic ticket, or the 50,000 mile international ticket, whatever the sort of basic award price is. And we do it in a way that gives airlines the best chance to shine. We take the 20 largest routes, short haul and long haul, of each airline. So you're giving them the greatest chance of success. Where they have the most seats ought to be, and the most demand ought to be, where you would find the best availability. We're not picking obscure routes where, maybe they have one flight, maybe they don't have any flights, direct flights or something like that. And just doing what consumers do, say, give me 2 seats, give me 2 seats. And if you keep getting rejected time and time again, then you're going to end up on the bottom of the survey. And, let's the ones that are stingy, let's embarrass them.
And I still find when friends and colleagues ask me about award tickets, they're still shocked here a couple of years after this change that now airlines are not awarding miles by how many miles you fly, but they're awarding the miles based on how much you spend, which in some ways, if you're trying to buy cheaper tickets, means it's going to take you longer to get enough miles to redeem.
It'll take you a lot longer, and it's clearly aimed at rewarding high dollar business travelers, and basically punishing the customers that with some logic, the customers that provide the least amount of revenue to the airline. I think that as much as it's reduced the ability to game the system in many ways. There are a lot of people who could rack up a lot of miles on really cheap tickets and then redeem those miles for very expensive tickets. And that's a lot harder to do. What I think is really sort of unfair is that the redemption side has not matched the accrual side. So you earn miles now based on your ticket price, but you can't, on many airlines, you can't redeem them based on your ticket price. And so it's really one-sided. I think airlines like Southwest, where it's just a straight ratio. You earn based on the ticket price. The number of points you need on Southwest for an award ticket varies exactly with the price of the ticket. So if the ticket is $200, the award price is going to be 1.7 times $200 in points. If it's $400, the number of points will be twice as much. And so you know exactly what you can do with your points. With other airlines, they're hard to earn and they're darn hard to redeem. But they changed one side of the equation and not the other.
Right, sort of like dynamic pricing, where perhaps it's a $300 ticket, and you spent years trying to accrue 25,000 miles, only to find out that $300 ticket that you want is really 50,000 miles because it's on a Friday or something like that.
Yeah, and that's the problem with it, and it may have nothing to do with dynamic pricing. It's just that they've shut off the inventory of 25,000 mile awards in that market completely, or all but 2 days of the year, or whatever it might be. I've seen some really ridiculous things where there are plenty of cheap seats available in a market, but as you say, no cheap award seats, and they're all 50 or 60,000 miles, and that's a terrible use of your miles, a terrible value for your miles. So if you're going to award miles by dollars, I think you also ought to set your redemption by the ticket price, rather than some arbitrary standard of, this category or that category.
Well, if any airline CEOs are listening to this podcast, we hope that you'll listen to Scott and take note of that. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I have been a long-time subscriber of the Journal, and I have noticed that the topics and the beats have evolved over the years. So I'm curious, Scott, how does travel coverage fit into the Wall Street Journal strategy? You're not really just reporting on stock quotes and what moves markets, but it seems like you do get a lot of support, and your column is very popular.
Yeah. The column, it's interesting with online journalism where you can measure exactly what people are reading and all. And the column is well read. When we've done focus groups with readers, and this goes way back. And I sometimes joke about it. The two things that all Wall Street Journal readers do are pay taxes and travel. It actually more of them travel than pay taxes.
Oh, okay.
And
IRS.
So, travel is very important to our readers, and certainly to many others. And it's one of those things that, plenty of people do it for business, plenty of people do it for pleasure, and plenty of people aspire to do it. There is an aspect, and sometimes we do this when we're writing about first class travel or business class travel or things like that. There's an aspirational aspect of plenty of readers who say, I'm never going to spend $7,000 for an airline ticket, but I kind of like to know what you get and what it's like, and so we do some of that as well. I think this is a topic, an industry that it still confounds a lot of really smart people. And so the more you can explain it to people, the better they'll feel, the more comfort they'll have. And there are just so many areas. Safety, a great area. And people want to know, is evacuating an airplane more difficult because the seats are pushed closer together and things like that. Sometimes there are surprising answers that you wouldn't expect, and no matter how frequently you travel, you're still going to learn something.
All right, Scott, right now we are going to ask you to get out your crystal ball here. Right after we finish celebrating New Year's, I noticed that you warned us right out of the gate in January, here comes one more year of big change for travelers. So what did you mean when you wrote that, and what's your outlook for 2017?
I think prices have started to creep up, and will continue some to creep up. We had about 3 years of overall declining prices in travel. I think there's more consolidation afoot with the Alaska Virgin America merger that has some implications. I think the political situation is really pretty volatile in travel. We don't know what the new administration is going to do with the Middle East carriers, for example, which are having a major impact in long distance travel.
Right, and let's just remind our listeners here, the American carriers, Delta, United, American, they are absolutely fighting tooth and nail. They want the government to renegotiate the Open Skies Agreement to prevent the Middle East carriers like Emirates and Etihad and all of these from being able to fly here and offer these cheap fares, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And it's not just the ability to fly for Emirates, for example, to fly nonstop from 17 different U.S. cities to Dubai, or whatever the number of cities in the U.S. they fly to. It's a large number. They're bringing in very large airplanes. They are sucking up a lot of traffic that the U.S. Carriers think they're losing. I happen to think that they're actually not hurting the U.S. airlines all that much yet. They're connecting a lot of people to places that U.S. airlines just don't have good connections to, in India, for example, and they have changed travel in the sense that there are a lot of cheap seats and they provide good service, and so the ability for when I've flown and talked to church groups going to Nepal or places like that they could never do those trips before because the tickets were too expensive and it was too hard to get there. And now it's easy with these guys. They provide high quality service at an affordable price, and that's a significant opportunity for travelers. But the real fear is that with open skies, it's not just if you have open skies agreements between two countries, they can also fly between a third country. So, for example, Emirates flies from Newark to Milan in Italy, and that's a whole different can of worms in terms of, because we have an open skies agreement with the European Union, of a Middle East airline actually starting transatlantic service that really could impact U.S. airlines.
And I think we're also seeing this now with Norwegian Air, right? They fly
Yes.
through, I think, Iceland and then coming with these crazy routes. I think one was a $69 fare that we saw just a couple of weeks ago, an airport just north of New York City, right? That they were going to start flights from there.
Right, to Stewart Airport, which is an airport that the Port Authority in New York has been trying to stimulate, to Hartford, Connecticut. And these smaller airports, and this has been going on. Condor is another one, started flying from Frankfurt to Providence, Rhode Island. And for a smaller city to have transatlantic service, especially on a discount airline, is a huge thing. Mm-hmm. A lot of these airports are providing marketing dollars and other support for this new service. The small guys are basically employing a Southwest Airlines kind of strategy where they say, okay, we'll fly to Hartford or Providence instead of Boston or New York, and we'll kind of stay under the radar and we won't anger Lufthansa or British Air or whoever it might be. And so they won't match our prices, which is great for us if we can have a difference in the market. So it's and Norwegian is, I think they're flying from Paris to Newark or someplace like that, which, the ability to fly without sticking to bilateral country borders is really huge. We saw a huge change. It's analogous to the huge change we saw in the U.S. in 1978 when we deregulated aviation and said, okay, anybody can fly anywhere. Any U.S. airline can fly anywhere. And so if you get to the point in the world where essentially any airline can fly anywhere, it really changes competition.
Well, I've said for a long time to people that really if travel does not have to be 2 weeks and $5,000 if you want to go somewhere. That there are ways to do it cheaply and affordably and in a shorter time period if you're flexible with your carrier and your destination and your dates and whatnot. So do you think then for 2017 that if the traveler is flexible with a Norwegian or with a different airline and also with their destination, that perhaps this may be a great year to go overseas for less money than they would have paid maybe 5 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. And not just because, largely because of the air service options that are out there, but also the strong dollar is a huge win for U.S. travelers. So makes your hotel cheaper, makes your meals cheaper, makes your attractions cheaper. It's everything is on sale in essence because of the strong dollar. But the amount of air service that's coming into the U.S. from all parts of the world, discount Asian carriers, the Middle East carriers, discount European carriers, it really creates tremendous opportunities. There are now two discount airlines flying between Iceland and the U.S., and they have cool deals where you could stay over for a few days before you fly on to Europe or things like that. So, you get on a 767 on WOW, and that's the name of the airline, and go to Iceland, and then go on to Europe or whatever you want to do. It just creates the opportunity for adventures that would have been thousands of dollars before and really difficult to do.
And oftentimes those stopovers, like saying stopping in Iceland, are free. I mean, just free to the traveler.
Yeah.
They can book that into the price of the ticket. You mentioned the currency, and we actually wrote about this a couple of weeks ago on voyagereport.com. But I mean, there are a lot of people that are now predicting that the euro is going to reach parity with the dollar. I think yesterday or the day before I saw was at $1.05 or $1.06,
Yeah.
and the pound is down. I mean, just incredible historic levels.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're going to look back on this and say, boy, why didn't we take more advantage of it? Because it really is remarkable, the value you get for the dollar now.
A little bit of nostalgia here, though, with all these cheap fares. Airlines are looking for more efficient aircraft, which means that the inefficient aircraft have to sort of go to the aircraft graveyard out in the Southwest desert. And I'm so sad to see, and maybe this is just me, but the retirement of these 747s, the queen of the skies. Delta, I think, and United planning this year to retire them. Scott, this is my Av geek speaking, but I actually scheduled a trip last year just so I could fly on Delta's 747 before they retired. Is that a good move? I mean, I think a lot of us have nostalgia for that plane, but with 4 engines and, you've got the 787 with the composite now, maybe it's just out of date? I don't know. You tell us.
Well, I think it is. The 4 engines is a real deal breaker now. It does take a lot more fuel than a 2-engine airplane. Engines have gotten so powerful that you really don't need it. So I think obviously it's more expensive to fly. But the other aspect of it is there is I think a beneficial trend for travelers with more direct flights to secondary cities, to large cities, but avoiding hub connections. And there's an efficiency to that as well. So with the 787, with long range 777s, with the A350 coming from Airbus, there are a lot of really comfortable, really nice wide body planes. They're 2-engine planes, and more in the 300 seat area than the 450 seat area, or in the 787, sometimes even 200, 220, 240, that kind of thing. And the ability to fly over the top of a hub and head straight to a different city shortens the travel times for people, makes it a whole lot easier to make that business trip to a city in China that you can get a direct flight out of San Francisco or even Los Angeles. It just, I think, opens up a great example. British Air is flying a 787 from London to Austin, Texas. So there's Austin, which never could have done that before. Right. You never fill a 747. And you would have had to go through Dallas or Houston or who knows, Chicago, New York, or Atlanta, wherever to connect to get to London. Well, now you got your own flight and on a great airplane, and it's been a significant boost to Austin.
Before we let you go, Scott, is there anything else in the 2017 outlook that you see in travel or transportation or airlines that our listeners should be aware of and prepared for? That's a really good question. I think one of the better innovations coming
to U.S. airlines is the premium economy cabin. And we'll start seeing more of that in international flights. Premium economy has been a huge hit on international airlines in different parts of the world. Started a long time ago with Virgin Atlantic and British Air. Spread like crazy. It's good for airlines. A lot of them say the premium economy cabin is the most profitable square footage on the airplane. You can, depending on the airline, for $200 more, $500 more, whatever it is, a premium economy ticket. And it's not a fee. It's not just paying for some extra leg room. On most airlines, you get a wider seat, you get more leg room, you get more recline, you get different meal service, you get your own cabin in essence, with your own bathrooms for the premium economy cabin. In some ways, on some airlines, it's what business class used to be before everything went to lie flat beds. So a really good option for a lot of leisure travelers who are just fed up with the really cramped conditions in coach, and are willing to pay something more if it's worth it, if it's significantly better comfort. And American Airlines is going to start it this year. Delta as well. United will have it. I think the competitive pressure to match other airlines' premium economy will be one of the big developments of the year.
Just don't choose the middle seat in premium economy, right?
Well, yeah, but the beauty is some of them don't have middle seats.
Oh.
So.
Fantastic. Scott McCartney, he is the travel columnist for the Middle Seat column at the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insight and your knowledge. Fantastic conversation.
Sure. Great to be with you, Mark.
Listeners, do you read The Middle Seat? What has been your favorite articles? Do they affect how you travel or where you're planning to travel this year? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.